I would like to tell you, so our latest edition here today, we're going to talk about global manufacturing and shipping updates. I'd like to introduce to you Don Lincoln. He's our Senior Vice President of Lumicon. He's in charge of our R&D, research, engineering, and our production team. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Don.
All right,
Welcome.
thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Real quick, we're going to go through some current issues in the global shipping and manufacturing space, particularly how it relates to shipping from China. So we're going to talk about some shipping delays that have been ongoing for months now. Port congestion, I'm sure everyone has heard about what's happening in the ports on both sides of the Pacific, and then some recent developments with power outages in China. So let's start with some shipping stats, just for some background. 80% of goods that are traded globally are shipped via ocean. There are roughly 25 million containers in circulation in the world right now, and roughly 6,000 container ships to move all those goods around, with a total ship capacity of 13 million 40-foot equivalent units. So that would be a 40-foot container. So globally, we can move 13 million containers. And the average ship capacity is about 5,000 containers. Some are more, some are less. The largest is a relatively new ship from 2017 that can carry over 10,000 containers, and it runs a European route from Asia. In the US, 40% of the goods that we receive come in through Long Beach or LA. The remainder go through ports on the East Coast and elsewhere. During a normal year, there's about 700,000 containers that come into those ports, those two ports in Long Beach and LA, per month. This year, that is averaged about 860,000 containers per month. So that's about a 22% increase. So what's driving that is a spike in demand that has happened, basically started during the pandemic in 2020 and has continued into 2021, primarily fueled by this 60% spike in consumer goods demand. So all of those TVs and phones and computers that we ordered during the lockdown continue to fuel the spike in demand here. So that's really what's driving all this container traffic. Adding to it, this is a recent drone photo taken in Shenzhen, China, last summer, of all of the outgoing containers waiting to get loaded onto ships and sent on their way. I believe this photo was from July of this year. They experienced some shutdowns in early 2021 related to COVID, and even by June, they were still at about 20% shipping capacity out of this port, which is the largest shipping port in China. Let's see here. So the backlog as of July was about 160,000 containers waiting to be shipped. And they had 67 ships on average waiting, anchored out in the bay, waiting to get loaded up and sent on their way. On the US side of the Pacific, the ships waiting for offload in California, I believe, topped out at 73, according to this article. It was on September 16th. Basically what that looks like, here's a screen grab from the other day. This is Port of Long Beach here, and the Port of LA is up here, Catalina Island. This is off of marine traffic. But zooming into Long Beach, you could see all of the green dots are container ships at anchor waiting to get in for offload. These red dots are tankers carrying liquid. So the green ones are containers of product waiting to get in. So on the 15th of October, we were still sitting at about 63 container ships waiting to get in. On an average year, normally we would expect one or two ships out at anchor waiting their turn for offload. So this is a significant spike in backlog of product trying to enter the country. Here's some drone shots of those ports, LA and Long Beach. Again, ships stacked up trying to offload. You can see all the containers stacked that have been offloaded, and they're certainly running low on space to store some of these containers. A couple shots of New Orleans up here in the left corner, and Bayonne, New Jersey down here in the right corner. So this is not exclusive to the West Coast, but it's all ports of entry in the US that are backed up right now. So graphically, you can see these lines up here. This is schedule reliability. So taking, say, the blue line, which is 2019, a normal year, the global shipping reliability was somewhere around 80%. This magenta line represents 2021. As of June, it was about 38% reliable for goods landing on time. And right now, as of September anyway, that number was still hovering around 35%. The average delay right now, this one shows in June that it was about 6.5 days that containers were delayed to basically get on the road. In September, that number had creeped up to 11 to 15 days. So the average delay in time has gone up significantly. So total transit times, just to give you an idea of how long things take currently, if you're shipping from China to the West Coast and your scheduled departure date was September 3rd, you can expect a total delay time both on the China side and on the US side right now of about 18 days total, plus 30 days total transit time, actual sail time across the Pacific. Might have your container available at port for pickup on the 15th, arrival at the distribution center on the 25th, and potentially on the shelf in your store on November 6th. So the total shipping time is somewhere around 64 days right now for West Coast shipments. East Coast, Midwest, and Europe, obviously, it's even longer. So just to give you an idea of what the transit times are currently looking like. So shipping rates, again, for West Coast shipments, transit time of 64 days. If you were to fill a 40-foot container of product and ship it via ocean in 2020, that would have cost you $3,600 to get it from China to California for offload. That went up substantially in 2021. That same container would have cost $15,500 to go from China to California. And actually the spot rates in September for what they call expedited service, which is, you know, I'll put guaranteed in quotes, but it's guaranteed delivery on time. Those rates went north of $20,000 per 40-foot container in September of this year. So that's a huge spike in cost for shipping. Air freight, if you were going to ship something by air freight, the transit time is much shorter. This 10 days includes delays after landing and customs and whatnot. So in 2020, it cost roughly $3.44 a kilogram to ship something from China to California. They don't go by per unit, they go by weight. In 2021, that had increased to $7.90, an increase of about 229%. So the question of shipping something by ocean or air, if you were taking a 20-pound LED area light, you wanted to ship it from China to California, you could ship it via air freight for roughly $71 right now. If you were going to ship it via ocean, of course, you'd have to fill a container of them, which is, let's just say is 1,100 units. Divided by the container shipping cost, it would cost you roughly $14 to ship it via ocean. So it really boils down to when do you need it. If you can wait 64 days, it's definitely worth the savings, I think. Something that doesn't often get talked about, but part of the hazards of ocean shipping are lost containers, and container loss has kind of spiked in the last 12 months. In the 12-month September to September period in 2021, 4,000 containers have been lost compared to 1,300 average in recent years. So the theory is that the shipping backlog is forcing ships to carry more containers than they normally would, which adds weight and can destabilize the stack. And of course, the increased frequency and ferocity of storms and the fact that ships are more reluctant to go around storms and kind of feel compelled to go through them now puts them in worse weather and puts the whole stack potentially in jeopardy. So there's been a couple of recent incidents. This is the Eversmart, normally carries 3,500 containers. It experienced the storm and lost 43 of them over the side with some damage to another 34. This one, the Apis 1, occurred last November. Again, another storm. Was carrying 7,000 containers and lost a little over 1,800 of them over the side during a storm. So they don't stop and pick those up. They're just lost. So if you order something from China and it never shows up, maybe check the Pacific Ocean. It might be out there somewhere. Train yard congestion. So of course, once the containers get offloaded in port, they have to be picked up either by semi or loaded onto a train for transport inland, often to Cleveland or Chicago or some other train yards. Chicago is the largest one in the country. And right now it's experiencing a pretty significant container pileup, waiting for trucks to come pick up the containers and transport them to distribution centers. So there has been, a recent lack of what they call chassis, which are, I guess, think of them as the flatbed frame that containers get loaded on. So semis can haul them away. So there's a limited number of chassis, and there's a shortage of them right now, of course, because there's been a spike in the number of containers. As of August 31st, the rail yard backups in Chicago were adding an additional 3 weeks to the transport time through the Midwest. And again, like everywhere else, trucking is experiencing a driver shortage, shortage of workers, and high demand. So companies are booked 2 weeks out compared to 2 to 4 days in normal times. And according to the broker boards, there's one truck available for every 12 loads right now, which is a huge backlog. So a lot of people ask how this continues to happen this year. And it's interesting, there's something called a beer game that was developed by a professor at MIT like 40 years ago. And he used it as a teaching tool to illustrate supply chain disruption. So in a supply chain like ours, like many industries where there isn't a lot of flexibility to absorb fluctuations in demand and supply, you end up with what they call the bullwhip effect. And that's basically where you have a retailer increasing their orders slightly to reflect an increase in demand from consumers. And that slight increase causes increases from wholesalers to distributors and finally to the factory, where you end up with this huge swing of production to accommodate a relatively small tweak in demand at the retail level. So this kind of helps explain how we get into these situations where we're running out of toilet paper and chicken wings and semiconductors. It does affect the LED industry as well. Adding to this, in recent months, there's been a power problem in China. You may have heard about this in the news. Recently, China issued some new emission rules for their factories and their power plants. They hope to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So they've set some new emission targets. They also have Olympic Games next year that they probably don't want the additional embarrassment of choking people out with smog. So they're starting to really monitor emissions. So by mid-August, the government announced that 20 regions had failed the new standards, and they began ordering some plant shutdowns due to emissions. Contributing to this, there's been some recent political turmoil between China and Australia regarding COVID, and China stopped all imports of Australian coal, which is their largest supplier of coal and their cheapest supplier of coal. They can't switch those plants to natural gas because the cost of natural gas has doubled this year. And their power plants in China are not allowed to charge more to their customers to make up for higher material costs. So one of their solutions is just to shut down the plant. And they can't rely on hydroelectric power to fill the void because there's been a severe drought this year and hydroelectric is not producing like it once did. So without significant coal imports from Australia, China's relying on its own coal, which is expensive, relatively speaking. Their power plants can't operate at a loss, and they can't charge more for power unless the government approves. So again, these rolling blackouts have been an issue for the last month or so. Each morning, factory managers are advised of whether or not they're going to have power that day. So it really is a day-to-day situation. And in September, many factories were limited to 2 to 3 days of production because of these rolling power outages. And heading into Golden Week, which is national holiday in China, the first week of October, factory output had gone down significantly, basically because so many plants were closed and they were not able to manufacture. So that contributes to the improved shipping situation in China. Due to the power outages, there hasn't been a lot of material production, so the exports have slowed down significantly. It's starting to clear the ports in Yantian. Chinese government this week had finally approved some power rate increases. Emissions are going to remain a problem, but hopefully they can get some of these power plants up and functioning full time again. As a result of all this, the shipping rates in October have dropped significantly. Currently, as of 2 days ago, they were about $8,000 to ship a 40-foot container from China to California. And then the US government stepped in on the US side to try to improve the backlog. They've negotiated with Long Beach and Port of LA to move to 24/7 operations to try to clear some of the containers out. They've also negotiated with FedEx and major retailers to expand their freight hours to try to clear some of the containers out by truck. And right now, they're predicting some decent improvement by the first quarter of 2020. And that's all I had for the shipping update.
Okay. Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate that very much. I want to open it up to Q&A. So feel free to go into the chat button and or the question and answer button and go ahead and give us your questions. I've got some here that I'll start with. First one comes from Bob Kraus at Summer Electric in Canton, Ohio. It says, Don, besides highlighting the problem, what is Lumicon doing to address and resolve the issues, and how is Lumicon affected?
Well, I mean, there's only so much that we can do as a company to influence our supply chain. The best defense that we have in this particular situation is to try to have as many domestic suppliers as we can. I think we're probably in a better position in that regard than a lot of lighting companies, just because a lot of our supply chain is domestic. You know, we do a lot of casting in the US. A lot of fabricated panels are made here. Our PCB LED boards are manufactured here. But I mean, it is a global supply chain, so even our domestic suppliers are affected by the suppliers upstream of them. So even though we might buy most of our power supplies out of Mexico, the Mexican plant certainly gets a lot of its components from China. So the best we can do is try to domestic source. But again, everybody is affected in some regard by the supply chain.
Well, I will give a shout out to Don and his team. They've been way out in front of this, the entire time. And so our lead times have been very, very short, as most of you on this are aware. So a shout out to Don, like I said, and his team. Byron Day is asking, can we get a copy of this? Yes, we're recording today, and so we're going to we'll send it out as soon as it's done recording. We'll send you the link to everybody that was on today, and go ahead and make sure that you've got a link to the recording. It'll also be posted up on our website under resources. You can find our webinar series, and then so all of our webinars are currently on our website. All right. Don, when do you see them getting caught up?
Well, on the U.S. side, especially if production continues to be slow out of China for the next few weeks, that'll give the U.S. a chance to flush some of these containers off of the West Coast ports. So, the big concern is the flood of containers that continue to come in to fill the retail shelves for Christmas. And so that's why this 24/7 effort is ongoing to try to clear these containers. So it looks like on the US side, there's going to be significant improvement as early as December. But again, there's some things going on in China that could actually make the supply chain a little bit worse. If they can't come back to full production and meet the ongoing demand, then we could continue having these hiccups for well into 2022.
Great, thank you. So some of the other questions that I have here, Don, we're going to have to answer these privately to them because there's a lot of jokesters out there. So to Tom Brindley and some of you others, we'll get back to you. So but we appreciate you, and we're glad that you're on board with us today. If there's no other questions at this point in time, that's it for us today. We appreciate everyone joining us. Don, thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you all again on our next webinar. Should be this time next month. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.